Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, Professor of Brazilian History and Culture at Brown University and the National Co-Coordinator for the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is part of the Democracy Observatory and is supported by the Washington, Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming my friend and colleague, Lilia Shcwarcz. Lilia is Professor of Anthropology at Princeton University and the University of São Paulo. She is the author of many, many, many books in Portuguese and in English on the history and culture of Brazil. Some of her books available in English include The Spectacle of Races, Scientists, Institutions, and the Race Question in Brazil, 1870 to 1930, The Emperor's Beard, Dom Pedro II and His Tropical Monarchy in Brazil, Lima Barreto, a sad visionary in Brazil at the beginning of the 20th century, and Brazil, a biography, co-written with Eloísio Starling. And coming out in November will be Brazilian Authoritarianism, Past and Present. Lily regularly writes for popular newspapers in Brazil, such as Folha de São Paulo, Estado de São Paulo, and Nexus. Also, Lily is a pioneer and model of how academics can use social media platforms like YouTube and Instagram to increase historical consciousness. So welcome, Lilia, to Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for the invitation. My pleasure.
So before we get into some specifics regarding Brazilian history, culture, and politics, I want to start with the final point I highlighted in your biography. You have over 140,000 YouTube followers and over 400,000 Instagram followers. Over the years, you have expertly used both of these platforms to reach hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Tell me about this journey. What motivated you to take this route?
Thank you so much for the question. I think you know that in Brazil, we had a kind of prejudice of that academics, the idea is that academics cannot mix with this kind of social media. But I remember I started with my Instagram because of my other life, and because I'm also a curator for histories at MASP. It's the Museum of Modern Art in São Paulo. And then when I was working there, my Adriano Pedrosa asked me, the curator-in-chief, he asked me to open an Instagram just to share images. And then I started like this, Jim, just showing images in a very naive way. I'm also a photographer, an amateur photographer. So I started to share my photographies. It was very, very calm, soft. And then when Bolsonaro was elected in 2018, I was like all Brazilians I know, astonished with what was happening. And then I started, I remember that my first post was about our Minister of Science, the astronaut. And then Jimmy knows me very well. I'm a very ironic person. So I started writing about him and saying that he was a false astronaut and saying that I was with him, together with him in a meeting, and he used to cry at the same moments and he used to smile at the same moments. Everything was very fake. Then when I sent this post, and then immediately I received like hundreds of answers, not all of them very nice, I must tell you. And then with caps locks, with that terrible symbols and all the things. And as I am a very stubborn person, I said, oh, now I know. So now I'm going to describe all Bolsonaro's ministers. One, it's worse than the other, no? Because Bolsonaro promised to the Brazilians a very government with people that are very much in the areas, that people that are very much focused and concentrated and specialists, and they are the opposite. So that was the way I started, because I'm very stubborn. So I said, okay, so let me talk with people. And then I decided I would write every day a new post. It's just me, Jim. I am the one that I write the posts, I answer the questions and comments. And then another thing happened, because at the same time, a person called me and said, I would like very much if you would start a YouTube channel. And my first reaction was, oh no, I have too much things to do, and I'm not this kind of person. But then, after Bolsonaro's elections in 2019, after he stayed, he was not impeached, then I realized that good information, it's the only arm it's the only arm we have, that we need to open our spaces. So I said to him, to this person that wants to stay anonymous, I said, are you going to censor me? Or are you going to say, okay, you can talk about this and you cannot talk about this? He said, no, I have nothing to do with this. So I use the money just to have this group that helps me, because I cannot, to finish a video, it's complicated, no? And then I started the YouTube. So this is the idea. I have the Instagram and the YouTube. It's a kind of battle. It's a guerra de milícias. It's a kind of daily battle. And I'm not so sure that I will continue if Bolsonaro will not be elected on October. But that's another thing. That's future. At the moment, I want to be in this place too.
So how has your public presence shaped your own ideas of what's happening in Brazil and the world?
Oh, okay. I think that Bolsonaro was elected in the middle of a wave, a big wave, a very right-wing wave that started not just in Brazil, that's arrived not just in Brazil, but in the United States with Donald Trump, in Hungary, in Poland, and lots of places. So we intellectuals used to think that we were free from the right wing, not the right wing, because I have no problems with that, with conservative thinkers, because in my opinion, democracy lives better, and we have a healthy democracy if you have different political positions. My problem is with the right-wing, very right-wing thinkers and politicians. So what happened in Brazil was part of the same conservative kind of doing politics. I'm talking about men politicians, very white, very conservative, very people that can enter in politics using elections, but people that have no good reasons to make democratical institutions stronger. On the opposite. So Bolsonaro is part of this story, part of this moment. But I think that we are passing through a different moment now. For example, we can remember what just happened in Colombia. So for the first time, Colombia has a president coming from the left political side, and Colombia has now a black vice president. So I think that, and it's not just Colombia. So in my opinion, I can see a very optimist person, but in my opinion, I think things are changing now, that we have new utopias and new perspectives, and I hope this kind of good utopia would continue to blow until October.
So Lula remains ahead in the polls. Anything can happen between now and October 2nd, but what is your assessment of the state of democracy in Brazil as a result of the 3.5 years of Bolsonaro?
I think that Brazil, it's going to be very difficult if Brazil will have to face 4 more years of Bolsonaro government. I think it's going to be very, very, very dangerous for our democratic institutions. Bolsonaro is attacking every day. He's talking about a coup d'etat. Every day he's attacking democratic elections in Brazil, attacking the ministers of the judiciary. So I think it's a very urgent question for Brazil. And during 4 years, Bolsonaro destroyed a lot. Think about our let's talk about education. This is a government that didn't pay attention for education. We can see the scandal involving a former minister of education, because this is a government that wants to have an evangelical state, religious states, and Brazil is not a religious state. So that's very, very, very hard. Even if we think about the universities, Bolsonaro is very much focused against academics in Brazil. Bolsonaro is very much focused against journalism, against good journalism. And we have to think about the health situation. Brazil had now we are talking about almost 400,000 people that died because COVID in Brazil. And we have the worst government in this situation, because we are talking about a negationist government, a government that has no impact, is not very much concerned with science. So in sum, I think we had terrible 4 years, and will take us a lot to deal with this. So we really need another person that will be not Bolsonaro in the government, in the presidency.
You mentioned the recent crisis in the ministry with the former minister of education, who was trying to create relations with evangelical Christians. You pointed out that Brazil, since 1889, when the emperor was overthrown, has become a secular state. Could you tell us a little bit more about what happened with this crisis within the Ministry of Education with this former minister? What happened there? He's been recently arrested for criminal actions.
Yes. We had a sequence of ministers of education that one was worse than the other. When we think we had the worst, then we have another one that it's even worse. It's terrible. So we are talking now about 5 different ministers that had problems with the state and with civil Brazilian society. This last former minister, he is evangelical. That could be not a problem, but it's a problem if you want to impose religion in a secular state. This is the first thing. This is a minister of education that said that the LGBTQ+ population is deformed. He used this term. Can you imagine? A minister of education. This is a minister of education that entered in an airport with a gun, and he said, "Oh no, it was a coincidence. I didn't note I had a gun." James, can you enter in an airport and say, "Oh, this is a coincidence"? So this is the kind of minister we have, and also a minister very much against legal abortion. And this is a minister that it's very much connected with corruption. So we are not just him, but some leaders from evangelical churches were caught playing with the state, offering money and receiving money. And this was very much public. And this minister had to resign. And now he is in prison. But the thing is, it's not just this minister, because this minister, Milton Ribeiro, It's very much connected to Bolsonaro's wife, very much, and very much connected to Jair Bolsonaro. So this is very, very bad for his re-election. Very, very bad. And at the same time, Bolsonaro is a person without a word, because his first reaction was to say, okay, I'm going to burn if Milton Ribeiro is not an honest person. And after 5 minutes, and it was 5 minutes, this is not a metaphor, 5 minutes, he said, oh, no, I have nothing to do with the former minister, Milton Ribeiro. So this is an X-ray of Bolsonaro's government. This is a very symbolic.
It's very much what Donald Trump does as well. He kind of throws someone under the bus the minute that person no longer serves his interests, as Bolsonaro seems to do all the time. Lilia, one of the most important topics discussed in Brazil today revolves around affirmative action, or racial quotas, as it's referred to in Brazil. You have emerged as one of the leading voices in support of affirmative action, which, considering your scholarly interest in the legacy of slavery, the formation of evolution of racial identities in the state of Brazilian democracy, should come as no surprise. Would you mind explaining to our audience why this debate is so important in Brazil today, and how your opinion on this subject has changed over the years?
Yep. Okay. Brazil was the last country to abolish the slave system. I'm talking about the modern slave system, no, the capitalism slave system that started in the 16th century and ended at the 19th century. I'm not talking about slave systems everywhere, because we know we have slave system in the world, even nowadays. But let us talk about that slave system. So Brazil was the last one, abolished the slave system just in 1888, after United States, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. And the abolition in Brazil was a very conservative one. It was like, because they didn't think about inclusion, they didn't think about politics of reparation, nothing. Also, we must point that Brazil received almost half of the Africans that had to leave the continent. And also Brazil had slaves in all the territory. What this created? This created a kind of language of inequality, a very perverse language of inequality, and a very naturalized language of inequality, in the sense that people don't think that this is a violence. And then that remained. If you think about the myth of racial democracy, during years, Brazil was depicted as the country of racial democracy, even if Brazil had was very unequal in education sense, very unequal in health, very unequal in numbers of births and people that die in Brazil. So this is a way Brazilians want to show themselves, being very open, very tolerant. The Brazilians are not. And the new myth of racial democracy has another name, that is meritocracy. So how can we talk about meritocracy in a country so unequal, with so unequal conditions and starting points? So you asked me about my position, and that's true. In the beginning, I was not for affirmative actions or quota systems, because I used to say that there is just one race, the human race. That's correct. That's biology. But I'm not a biologist. I'm a social scientist. I'm a human science. And we know that societies can create other kinds of race, other kinds of social markers of difference. So society can create social race, and social race is very strong in Brazil. That's why we call that we have a structural racism. because it's in our structure, it's in Brazilian structure, and it's naturalized in Brazilian structure. So I changed completely. I'm very much for affirmative action now. I'm very much for quota systems in Brazil, because Brazil, it's not an universal society in terms of social opportunities, social, cultural, and political opportunities. So we have to talk about reparations, politics of reparations in Brazil.
So how does that work in the University of São Paulo as an example? How does the quota system work at USP, the University of São Paulo?
Yeah, I'm not proud to say that University of São Paulo was one of the last public universities to adopt quota systems. It was a very important battle there, very important, very difficult, but the good thing, it's working now. And the good thing is, Jim, that University of São Paulo, that is the biggest university, public university in South America, was completely white. When we started with an ethical census at the University of São Paulo, what's very, very impressive how University of São Paulo was conformed by a white elite of São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro also, because people used to travel to go to University of São Paulo, used to travel. But now with quota system, things are changing. And the main importance for me is that I defend quota system for an historical reason, but I also defend quota system because of a very positive philosophy, because difference creates difference. I'm going to tell you a good example, my example. For years, I used to give a program called History of Brazilian Thinking in Brazil. Looking backwards, I can say to you that my program was completely white. And I just put men and thinkers in Brazil. That's not a coincidence. Then it was very important to have Black students to put a pressure and say, come on, 56% of Brazilian population, it's Black or pardo. So it's brown, Black, as we say, as you say in the United States, negra, as we say in Brazil. And am I going to say that we have not Black thinkers in Brazil? That's not right. That's a kind of social amnesia. It's a kind of silencing the past. So this is the good thing, that we have to change, that have to open our minds. We have so many Black thinkers like Lima Barreto that I studied, but Abdias Nascimento, Lélia Gonzalez, Sueli Carneiro, and lots of them, that we have to put them inside the academic programs. Otherwise, we're going to continue with this.
So in addition to changing the curriculum by including authors, Black authors in the curriculum, what has been the experience in the classroom in terms of a difference in the way classroom dynamics take place?
That's very important also, because having a class that it's not so homogeneous, that it's not so equal, it's very important. It's not boring. And on the top of it, you can include politics in a big sense. And I'm not talking just about government and states and ministers, but I'm talking about big politics, big policies, what we want to do in the future, what we are planning for our present and our future. Can we have a democracy in Brazil? We were talking about democracy, but can we talk in a democracy in a country so racist as Brazil is? In my opinion, no. This is not a democracy. We know that democracy is an incomplete system. That's part of the beauty of democracy, because rights you have to conquer again and again and again. But it's very difficult to talk about democracy in a country that excludes 56.4% of its population.
Lily, going back to Bolsonaro, he came to power more than 3.5 years ago, and many intellectuals have struggled to come to grips with this depressing reality. How did Brazil, in your opinion, a country that a decade ago seemed like a global success story, go from being a model of democracy to this global pariah? What's really going on in Brazil that explains this process?
Okay.
It's a hard question, I know.
I have 4 hours now. Okay, I can give you an answer in la longue durée, in a going
Sure.
back history, and also a short durée. Make it short. Let me talk about the two of them. In my book on Brazilian authoritarianism, I talk about I have two main ideas that organize the book. The first one is that the present is full of past. The second one is that for those that were like surprised with Bolsonaro's election, I say in the book, Brazilians were always authoritarians. Why? Because what do you think about a country that had a system for more than 4 centuries, a system that supposed that one person can own another person? It's a very violent system, organized with the language of violence. What do you think about a country organized about big properties with landowners, like that can be the law, can be the religion, can be everything. So this is a very authoritarian country. So they were always there. Think about the rural section, the rural economy in Brazil. I'm not against rural economy. I'm against the things they represent. People that do not respect indigenous people, do not respect indigenous land, do not respect Amazon, do not respect us, the others. And Bolsonaro is very much connected with this group. Everybody talks about the connections that Bolsonaro, yes, he has with the militaries. But let us talk about this section, the agrarian section in Brazil, and the influence they have in this government. So, and they are very authoritarian persons and people that I call in my book that they were people, nostalgic people, and very vengeance people. Can I use this term?
Yeah, they were very much interested in getting vengeance.
Vengeance, no? Because I'm talking about 27% of the population, a very white population, men population, and they are very people that used to think that after the Constitution of 88, that Brazil was delivered to LGBTQ population, to Black population, to women population, to indigenous populations, and that they lost place because of them. This idea of losing place is a very nostalgic idea, because they think that Brazil, that they are the owners of Brazil. They were in the past and they are in the present. So we are talking about this group. It's 27%, but a very organized group, a very organized one. And so let me talk about the recent history. In my opinion, that started in 2013 with big manifestations in the streets, that Brazilians couldn't understand how divided was the country in 2013. Then we must point the coup d'etat against Dilma Rousseff in 2016. If you look to the photography in our parliament, they were all there, white politicians, very much full of hate, full of talking against other kinds of politicians, talking against difference, talking against, very intolerant. Then this group was elected in 2018, and this is the group that is in power in Brazil. And the story is very much like Trump stories, because think about when Trump was elected, people would say, he will not stay, he will be impeached in 2 months, he will impeach, and he stayed. And look what happened in the United States. And the same story in Brazil, Jim. Because when Bolsonaro went in 2018, you remember that people were saying, he was not going to be elected, he's a clown. And then he was elected. And then people would say things like this, he will not stay. He has no power, but he has power. So this is very much frightening, because, and in my book, I just mentioned Bolsonaro once, because I don't think, Jimmy, that Bolsonaro is a cause. He's not a cause, he's a symptom. He's a symptom of this very deep Brazil that was always there. But we, the progressive people in Brazil, we didn't want to see, because we thought that democracy was our last goal, that we achieved democracy. But democracy is not like this. So we have to conquer democracy once again.
Lilia, in May this year, something happened in Brazil that was very, very disturbing to me. The video of the military police in the state of Sergipe killing Genivaldo dos Jesus Santos, a Black man who suffered from mental illnesses. And in the video, you see the police officers forcibly restraining him inside a police vehicle while spraying him with pepper spray. And it was such a strong scene. It was etched on my brain. But shortly thereafter, when the video went viral on social media, additional videos showed the police training sessions, actually showing police how to do the exact same process. Could you comment on this event and situate it within the broader contours of Bolsonaro's Brazil?
Yep. Unfortunately, you have lots of names that I could quote here if we would have time. But certainly, I want to go back to Marielle Franco situation, because Marielle was a very important person in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil, a Black politician, very popular. And Marielle was a person coming from the slums, from the favelas, and she used to say that she was not in the Brazilian statistics because she survived, and she studied. She went to the university. She went to she was elected, but that was very perverse in Brazilian history, because she was not right, because she was killed in front of all of us. When Marielle Franco was killed, a dream of Brazil died immediately, or we could see that there was another Brazil that we denied, that we didn't want to see. That was just the beginning. But we could talk about the killing of Beto Freitas, a black person that was in a supermarket in Porto Alegre. That was the day of Black conscience in Brazil. And Beto Freitas was killed in front of all of us, because his killing was filmed. He was, it was not the police, it was private police, let's put it like this, but he was inside the supermarkets. He was they went with him to I think it was a parking place, and they filmed him dying. Very similar to what happened with Floyd in the United States. And he was saying things, I cannot breathe. I think a lot about this sentence, I cannot breathe. That was the same situation that Genivaldo Jesus dos Santos experienced in Sergipe. He couldn't breathe. And again, everything was filmed. Everything was, we could testify this. This is, again, I am an anthropologist and an historian, and I believe very much in symbols, that symbols has efficacy, that they show us, they can show us lots of things, shows us lots of things. And the experience of Marielle, Beto Freitas, Genivaldo, and others, they show us this kind of military regime that we are experiencing in Brazil. They showed us how Brazil was becoming Brazil was always a very violent society. But as I'm insisting, Brazilians wanted to show very much like this very positive image. It's not like this. Brazilians are not focused to show this image. We are focused to show this another image, another depiction of this very, very intolerant country, very violent country. And in my opinion, this is one of the consequences of Bolsonaro's government, because Bolsonaro's giving this image, this public image of a person that believes in violent solutions, that it's arming population, that it's very much connected with this very violent, I insist, police force. At the same time, he justifies this kind of actions. He justifies not talking about this. He justifies this kind of violent solutions. And we could talk about the case that happened in Amazon, the killing of Don Phillips and Bruno Pereira. Don Phillips, a journalist from The Guardian, and Bruno Pereira, an indigenous, very well known from FUNAI, that is this institution that takes care of Amazon and indigenous people. And even so, they were very well known, but that not avoided them to be killed. And what Bolsonaro's and the government's reaction? They started talking they started blaming the victims. They started saying that that was not correct of them to be there. And the problem was not Bruno and Don. The problem was the persons that were not following the law. But the answers the government give us, it's always like this. Oh, that was an adventure. It was not correct to be there. So my question is, Jim, what's the consequences for the population for listening to this kind of message for 4 years? No? What the kind of things that the government allows giving the population this kind of answers? So that the question is always like this. You cannot blame me. You have to blame the victim. This is a problem.
Lily, some people call the Bolsonaro government a fascist government. Your family fled from fascism in the 30s to Brazil, barely survived fascism in Europe. What is your opinion about that debate? How do you take that discussion?
I think that discussion has two different sides. As historians, we are obliged to explain the difference between that moment and this moment. We don't have concentration camps, for example. We don't have extermination camps. And also we know that social and historical situations were very much different in Europe and Brazil and Latin America and even United States or Hungary. So we have to use, as historians, we have to use history to put concepts in context. But even so, I always remember that history is not. I don't believe in a deterministic history. History does not determine. It's not like this. But we can give a kind of, let me remember you that fascism, Nazi regimes happened in the 40s and 50s. That's very important for me to remember. We have to use history to remember, and in order to not to forget. So we can compare. We have some similarities that it's our obligation to talk about it. For example, Hitler was elected. He was regularly elected, as Trump, as Bolsonaro. And we know that if we want to talk about democracy, democracy is not just gain an election. It's how you keep election during your, how you respect institutions, how you respect minorities, how you deal with people that are very much different. Politics is the art of creating consensus. But this is not the kind of thing that we can see in this kind of president like Bolsonaro is, like Trump was. This is the opposite. And this is so the idea is history can ring a bell. Not to say it's the same, that what happened in the past is going to happen in the present. But it's to say another thing. It's to say what happened in the past, and then we can avoid in the present. We are not smarter than people that used to live in the 30s and in the 40s of the last century. What do we have? We have the historical experience, and we are obliged to remember.
Speaking of historical experience, you've worked in museums for many years. What has been that experience like for you as an anthropologist and a historian?
That's a very important experience for me. You know me very well, and you know that I think that historians and social scientists are very, very, we have a very good anthropology, history in Brazil, but we are not very, we use images as images would be like illustrations. I'm very much against this kind of use of images, because images are not illustrations, are very powerful documents. It's very interesting how when we are facing a document, a traditional document, I write a document, we're like this. We want to know the context, we want to know the authorship, we want to know everything about this document before using it. But when we are in front of images, normally we put images like, okay, let me put it like this to make it more beautiful, nicer. But images are not like this. For example, I'm finishing a book called The Kidnapping of Independence. It's a book about lots of images, but mainly one image, Pedro Américo's image called Independência ou Morte, Independency of Death. If you look to our books, normally this beautiful big painting, it appears in the context of independence. But in my opinion, that's wrong, because this is a painting created in the sense that he paid for it by the second Reich, by Pedro II, that wanted to give a better image to his father, Pedro I, that wanted also to show that our independence was a beautiful one that had one protagonist, Pedro I. So nations can imagine themselves using one image. And this is a very interesting case because we know, because Pedro Américo wrote a book about this, saying that he created the whole situation, that he based his painting in another painting, a French painting, that he killed the geography. He knew that was not a mountain in Ipiranga, but he said, I have to create a mountain to celebrate Pedro I. He knew that Pedro I was not in a horse, that he was in a donkey. But he said, no, the donkey is not enough. It's not beautiful enough. So what's the point to analyze this image? Is to say, this is a very powerful image because Brazilians can imagine the birth of the nation using one picture that was imagined. So, and with lots of consequences. So what the importance of working in museums, because our history of art, not just Brazilian history of art, it's very much colonial, white, and all protagonists are men. And we have to change our imagination. If you want to decolonize our history, we have to start changing, decolonizing our imagination. And we have to start reading pictures and not using pictures as they were naive or just beautiful. They can be beautiful, but they are not certainly naive. Mainly political pictures.
Lilia, as we come to the close in this interview, I wanted to ask you, as someone who has taught both in Brazil and the United States, what advice do you have for Brazilians living abroad or friends of Brazil, people who study the country, who have lived in Brazil, and those who love its people and country? What is their role in defending democracy in Brazil?
I think it's a very, very important role because Brazil is a continental country. And continental countries, as United States, as Brazil, can be very isolated countries. And we are experiencing a very difficult situation in Brazil. The crisis is everywhere. It's a political crisis, economical crisis, moral crisis, cultural crisis. And we need to have this echo and this strong voice outside, claiming, asking, challenging and denouncing what is happening in Brazil. Otherwise, we will stay isolated. And you know very well in the history what happens with countries and citizens that stays isolated by their own luck or destiny. History cannot be like this. So you have a very, very, very important role in claiming for rights in Brazil and helping us not to be alone. Alone is a political and philosophical situation. And we are not alone. And that's very much important for Brazilians that live in Brazil and that want to stay in Brazil.
Lily, thank you so much for giving us the time today to talk about your work and your thoughts about Brazil. I've really enjoyed having you on Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for this nice conversation.
So I hope you've enjoyed the interview. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.